Hello, this is Sylvia Schults, your host. In honor of Halloween, I have an absolutely wonderful show for you this time, so let's just jump into it and go lights out. The very best part of doing what I do is that I get to meet loads of interesting people. I found myself at the Pollock Hospital one May evening with a bunch of folks who were there for a tour. One of those ghost hunters was George Mueller, a professor at Heartland Community College who was there with his wife. We all got to chatting about ghosts, as I do so love to do, and we wandered quite a ways from the Peoria State Hospital. I've been fascinated with spooky tales ever since I was a kid, and stories like the one George shared with me are the reason why. If I had heard a story like this when I was 8 years old, I'd have just lost my mind. I listened, spellbound, as George spun his tale. Unfortunately, 3/4 of the way through it, I realized that my digital recorder wasn't turned on. George was gracious enough to give me his contact information, and later I got a hold of him on the phone. Lucky, lucky me, George shared with me the story of the house that isn't there. And lucky, lucky both of us. Now I get to share it with you.
The house that isn't there is an old story. It dates back to at least the 1940s. I'm not sure how much further back than that. My parents had heard of it, and my grandparents talked about it too.
Wow.
And it was very well known amongst high schoolers in the area I'm from.
Okay.
And the house is near Illinois City. I prefer not to give the exact location.
Okay.
Because it is private property. So if you wanted it, that'd be one thing, but for a broadcast, I'd rather not give it out.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, but what is important about the house is that to get to the house that isn't there, you leave the small town of Illinois City,
Mm-hmm.
you travel several miles into the countryside.
Okay.
Down narrow, twisting gravel roads. And it becomes more and more rural as you're driving away from the already very small town of Illinois City.
Mm-hmm.
And you're on a very narrow gravel road, and eventually you come to a valley. There's a stream at the bottom, and the valley's probably a 1/4 mile across, and you travel across the valley, and on the upper slope, on the far side from Illinois City, there's a spot on the side of the road where there's the remnants of an old farmstead.
Mm-hmm.
With the typical Illinois windbreak of trees around what would have been a house yard.
Okay.
And there's a spot to pull off the road, and it's been gated in, fenced in modern times, where the driveway to the house would have been. And to see the house that isn't there, you go on any night and pull up, and you have to leave your car and walk 50 feet or so away from the road to where there's a break in the trees and a fence and a gate in the fence. And then you look up and up a slight hill.
Okay.
And it's maybe 100 feet from the gate. There's a spot where there are trees, and there's not a house there now, but the trees form, well, kind of the outline of the house. And if you go during the day, it's just a very vague suggestion of the house.
Okay.
But if you go at night and wait for a while, the house outline becomes much stronger.
All right.
And this is something that we did not once or twice. We did it dozens of times over 3 years.
Wow.
So you go, and most nights, the house would just get stronger, and then you'd see the outline of the house, and that was it.
Okay.
Some nights, the outline of the house would get stronger, and then you'd see the outline of a window. Now, this was a stand of trees, so there's not a hole through them that light could have come through, but there would be a window that was lit as if there was a shade and then light leaking around it.
Oh, wow.
And then if you waited longer, you'd see the outline of a door. And often that happened fairly frequently.
Okay.
A few times we stayed, and there would be the outline of the window, and then the shade would roll up. and you'd see dark forms moving inside the house.
Mm.
And typically, people's nerve would fail at that point.
I can imagine.
So, and it was kind of a standard that you would go and see the house that isn't there, and then you would take other people and give them a scare.
Oh, yeah.
One of the other standards of the house is that cars would have trouble starting. So if you stayed until there was the window and figures moving, frequently you'd have to throw the car into neutral and roll away from the house, and then it would start.
Oh,
wow. And we did that, I don't know, we probably took people up there a dozen times and had that happen.
Oh, man. So this was a repeatable thing.
It was.
Oh, man.
And I'll get to, it stopped eventually, and I'll explain kind of why.
Okay.
Or why I think it stopped. For me.
Okay.
I know kids still go there today.
Wow.
We did this over and over again. It was 4 friends of mine and I who would go up and see this. And, over time, it got to be kind of old hats. So when we saw the people moving in the house, one night we didn't leave. So we're there, and it was kind of standard that I would watch in one direction and another person would watch in another, and we'd kind of keep our eyes out, because there was always a fear that the farmer who actually owned that land would chase people off.
Oh, okay.
It's hanging around. And behind you, when you were looking at the house, there was a huge open field that went on for several miles.
Okay.
And it just always made me a little paranoid.
Mm-hmm.
So one night we went there, and we're watching, and the house, the lights came on, and people were moving back and forth, and then the door opened.
Oh.
Now, I didn't actually get to see it open. So it was my other friends who did, because I was watching behind.
Okay.
The thing that startled me was there was something in the other field. A large, dark shape.
Okay.
So we ran, and we had a very systematic plan for getting into the truck. Who got in first, and who went where. So
that's smart.
And I jumped in, and we all got in. And I looked in my rearview mirror, and I saw dark red eyes, something moving low to the ground. Not a coyote. It looked more like a person, except all in darkness.
Oh.
Slinking on the ground.
Okay.
So we left. And that held us for a couple of days. For a couple of weeks.
Uh-huh.
And, of course, being high school boys, we decided we had to go back and see more. So we went back, and this night just happened to be pretty close to a full moon. Not quite a true full moon, but very close.
Gotcha.
And we were watching, and one of the other phenomenon that was really famous about the house that isn't there is that you'll go and there are blue fireflies. And if you look behind you in that vast field, there's typical yellow ones. In this field, there's blue. Very big blue fireflies. And only a few of them. And when things start happening at the house, there are no other insects around. All the fireflies disappear from the field behind you.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty striking. Well, and the fireflies from the house would always lead a path leading up to the house. Now, one day we did go up during the day and look around the site, and there is the ruins of a house there. There's actually a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that was disturbing, and is also part of the legend, is that there's an open well. And from what we could tell, where the fireflies would lead you, if you followed them, was right to that open well.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, that was a little disturbing.
That is disturbing.
Well, anyway, on the night in question, we went back, and it was a really nice, clear night, good, strong moonlight, and we're watching the house, and there's the blue fireflies, and the other bugs disappear, and there's no sound of crickets around or anything like that.
Creepy.
So, very picturesque. We're watching the house, and it's appearing, and then we started to notice there was a dark form coming over the crest of the hill next to the house. And it would appear in the distance, and then a little bit closer. And it wasn't like it walked closer, it just was, say, 150 feet away, and then it was 140 feet away, and then it was 130 feet away, and it was back at 150.
Oh, wow.
It was a really strange phenomenon, like it was flickering between two spots. So we're watching this, and wow, that was really interesting. And first there's one, and then there were eventually three.
Ooh, 3 different distinct shapes.
3 distinct shapes at the top of this hill.
Okay.
And it's just beyond and to the right of the house. And the lights in the house were very strong that night, and it was very clear. And we're watching, and okay, that's very interesting. And then suddenly they started to get closer rapidly, so it went from 150 to 140 to 130, and then to 120, which was closer than it had been before, and then 100, and then 50.
Yeah.
The 3 forms were coming at us. At the same time, we heard something on both sides crashing through the trees. And, okay, so we left very quickly. And this time we had decided beforehand we were going to stay and see all there was to see. But things that we didn't see crashing through the trees did throw a scare into us.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, we went back.
Oh, man.
So we had retreated, and then we came back.
Good for you.
Yeah, it was one of those nights. So we came back, and the house appeared again very quickly. And that was really unusual. Usually you had to go and stand out and watch the house for a while, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour or more, before your eyes really adjusted and you really saw it.
Okay.
This time we got out of the truck, and it was less than 5 minutes. And there it is, and there's the shapes again. And we're really watching, and that's interesting. And the house is really defined, and we saw people moving around inside the house, inside the window, and started to hear a burble of voices.
Okay.
And that was something that had never happened before. And then we saw the shape appearing, and my job in this particular time was to watch the field behind us.
Okay.
Because I'd seen that dark form that I think came out of that field once before, and I was kind of nervous about that.
Mm-hmm.
So, the form started to move, and it came down at us again. We heard sounds coming through the trees, but the thing that disturbed me was that something came from the other side of the truck. We ran. Oh, yeah. So we ran and jumped in the truck and drove off. And we got to the end of the road and went to a general store and had a soft drink. Mm-hmm. And looked at the side of my truck, and there was a rub mark in the dust where something had brushed up against it. Something roughly man-sized.
Yeah.
And this really got us curious. So we went back one final time.
Okay. This was the same night?
Same night.
Okay.
And by now, we'd started off at about 11, and it was about 1 in the morning when we went back the third time.
Okay.
Roughly.
Right.
So we pulled up, and I had my truck pointed so it would be heading downhill.
Okay.
And we're watching again, and the house appears really fast. There's the dark form, and we're really watching. We tried a camera another time, and it didn't work, so we didn't have a camera, but we really wanted to see what would happen if the door opened.
Yeah.
And we got our wish. We were there probably 15 or 20 minutes, and the house was really informed. The dark shape didn't appear, but the door to the house opened. And people came out. And it was really, it wasn't exactly misty, but it was difficult to see exactly what was happening. But it really looked like very large men in white shirts. And this is the thing that was really distinctive and truly gave it that touch of the bizarre that made it really far out.
Okay.
Is that after a minute, their hands were glowing. I can only describe it as being like their hands were on fire. And there were 1 or 2 of them came out of the house, but then there were others who were just kind of in the yard. And there was something hanging from the tree that was kind of next to the house. There was a very distinctive old hanging style tree with the branch that stuck out to the left.
Yeah.
There was someone hanging.
Okay.
So men in white shirts with hands of fire came out of the house, and they're mumbling or chanting or talking something just on the edge of hearing. No comprehensible words, but talking.
Okay.
And then the dark form appeared again. And this time the 3 dark forms came together into one, very tall, and I mean like 10-foot tall dark form, that came rushing down. The men in white shirts came down towards us, and we heard things crashing through the trees. Something was in the field on the other side, in front of the truck and behind. So we run and jump in the truck, and headlights started coming down the road.
Okay.
And I had an old pickup truck, but it had 2 semi-truck batteries in it because it was used to pull a trailer. So it had a very robust electrical system.
Okay.
Much, I think it was 6 times as much amperage as was usual for that truck. So my truck always started. I could, for example, leave my headlights on for an entire day and a night, and they'd start the next day.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, so I was the only person who never had trouble getting their vehicle to start.
Yeah.
This time I turned the key, and the battery went all the way to dead.
Oh, no.
So there's things coming at us, and we actually heard them rub against the truck. And the guy who was on the passenger seat on the far side yelled, "Oh my God, they're here, they're here, they're here." And I threw it into neutral, and we kind of rolled down. And then once we were 30 or 40 feet away from the entrance to the house, suddenly my truck started. But there's a car coming behind us, so I threw it into gear and we left.
Yeah.
And this time, hearing things actually hit the truck was enough to really put a scare into us, and into me in particular. So we took off, and we were doing, 70 or 80 on the Spack Brook. Yeah. Well, there was a car behind us, and this is a very windy road with lots of hills and several valleys. Every time I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw the headlights for this car. Even at times I shouldn't have.
Ooh. Like when it should have been hidden by a hill or a turn in the road.
Exactly.
Oh, man.
The other thing is, we were teenage boys, so we knew, usually could identify a car by its headlights.
Oh, sure,
in fact,
yeah.
It was kind of a game we played. These were old-timeies, round, kind of closer together than a modern car, definitely not a modern truck.
Yeah, I can picture that as you're saying that.
And so we went, I went as fast as I possibly could. Got to Illinois City and turned, and there's a long stretch of blacktop, and I went absolutely as fast as I could. So we're screaming down this road, and those lights, as soon as I turned onto the hard road, the lights, it's not like they came up the gravel road and turned behind me. They were the same distance behind me.
Oh, jeez.
So I drove as fast as I possibly could, and they're still the same distance behind me. So then I slowed down to see if it would catch up, and it didn't until I got close to a turn on the road. And then they started to close. And that made me a little nervous, understandably. So I made a couple of turns, and it just happened that my parents' church was very close by. And it's also on a bumpy gravel road out in the country that's very hilly. So we pulled into the churchyard, and jumped out. If something was coming to get us, we were going to see what it was, and by God, we'd be on holy ground when it happened.
There you go.
So we jump out, and we saw the headlights from the car crest a hill and then go down, and then a split second later, the taillights head out the other way. And I mean, this was instant. We used to, as you can tell, we were car guys. We used to practice bootlegger turns. That's where you spin a car around on the road. This was faster than you could do that.
Oh, man.
It was like it hit the bottom of the hill, and its headlights turned into taillights, and it drove the opposite direction at the same speed.
Wow.
And it drove off. And but we watched it drive all the way back from that church. You could actually see not exactly where the house that isn't there is, but you could see in that direction.
Okay.
It was perfectly clear night. Lightning was striking in that area. And we watched that car. It turned around and it headed back and completed the square and went back at least in that direction of the house. And we didn't go back for until after I was out of college, so 7 years later.
Oh, wow.
And when we did, nothing ever happened again, other than you saw the form of the house, and there would be that moment when we were there, and we tried it several times. There would be the moment when we were there when all the insects would stop making a sound, and all the yellow fireflies would disappear, and we'd only see the blue ones. And we did that a couple of times, and then, became adults and stopped.
Oh.
Now, the other strange thing about the men with white shirts and hands of fire, I had never heard this story about them. That had never been part of the stories. We've been warned about the open well.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking to some, and this was later, probably a year after that happened. We were talking to some older guys from the area, some people who were 3 or 4 years older than us, who we didn't know had gone there.
Mm.
And they said, "Oh, did you see the guys with white shirts and hands of fire?" And we said, "Yeah." And they said, "Yeah, we didn't stick around when that happened, but the car wouldn't start."
Oh.
And that was, we were talking to these, so we just happened to be talking to these guys in a diner in
Okay.
the area. And an older guy, someone I'd never met, turned around and said, "Yeah, you shouldn't go there. That's where that boy fell in the well. It's one of those guys with the white shirts and hands of fire. Yeah, I've seen them. You should never go back."
Oh, no. Wow.
So apparently the other people had seen the men with white shirts and hands of fire.
Yeah. Wow. What a tale. Oh, man. I do hope you've enjoyed this special Halloween presentation of Lights Out. For more spooky tales, please be sure to visit darkcontinents.com, where you'll find collections of ghost stories from many fine authors. Some of our story collections include Strange Tales and Southern Fried Ghosts and Their Midwest Cousins by David Youngquist, Ghosts Can Bleed by Tracy McBride, Quiet Houses by Simon Kurt Unsworth, Campfire Chillers by Dave Jeffrey, Monsters, Inc. by Scott Nicholson, and my own collections of unsettling tales, The Dark at the Heart of the Diamond, and Fractured Spirits, Hauntings at the Peoria State Hospital. Light your jack-o'-lanterns, share your candy, and be sure not to scream when we go Lights Out.